Bosses, how would you respond to a new employee who kicks off your first meeting by saying, "Before we talk about my work plan, I should probably let you know I have panic attacks that send me running to the restroom for a solid 10 to 15 minutes at a time. I'll need extra sick days for when I can't get out of bed in the morning thanks to my major depression. And it's likely I'll need to spend a week or so in an inpatient facility at some point to figure out why I think about suicide when there's no real reason why, just so you know." What would you say as opposed to, maybe we should give HR a call? We need to get past the idea that it's taboo for managers to talk about mental health with their employees in the workplace. Understanding that mental health is just as important to address as physical health is the first step that bosses need to take. If an employee comes to you with a broken leg, you wouldn't say, "Your life is great. Everything's fine. Suck it up," right? To know how to address an employee who comes forward with a mental health issue, it's important for managers to encourage open and honest relationships. Even though the common perception of vulnerability in the workplace is that it's seen as a weakness, could prevent promotions, or even get people fired, the fact is, openness and honesty actually strengthen relationships and create a higher level of trust. When an employee comes forward with a personal challenge they are facing, responding with, "I feel that way sometimes," or "Someone in my family deals with that. I know how hard it can be," the manager immediately makes the employee feel comfortable and creates a stronger connection between them. Unfortunately, though, many employees worry that if they do come forward with a personal challenge they are facing, managers will instead respond, "Now I know why your performance has been slipping," or "I'm not sure you're a great fit for this team." This fear causes employees to keep their struggles to themselves, which could lead to performance issues, time off for disability, or worse. For employees to feel safe enough to talk about their personal lives at work, it is crucial that managers openly support and encourage this vulnerability. I had my mental health struggles at work. None of the managers I'd had gave me the confidence that I could talk about the anxiety and depression I'd been suffering from since I was a teenager. I just knew that if I asked for help, I would surely be shown the door. It was right around my 10th year at the company I work for when I lost my dad, which caused my anxiety and depression to spiral. Getting through each day became nearly impossible. Instead of making progress on my various projects, I'd spend a solid portion of each day in a bathroom stall, sobbing with a fist in my mouth to stifle the sound. I did my best to go through the motions with my manager, Susan, by trying to put a smile on and convince her that I was a reliable, dependable, and trustworthy employee, even though I knew my own performance had been slipping. One day after a meeting where I had to excuse myself for almost 15 minutes thanks to a panic attack, Susan asked to speak with me privately. I just knew I was about to get fired. But instead of walking to her office, she guided me towards the cafeteria. "I'm getting some tea," she said. "Would you like some?" I will never forget the immense relief I felt as we sat at a table having a conversation, not about work, but about life. She spoke to me not like a manager to a direct report, but as one human being to another. I could see how much she cared about me, and I knew right away that I could trust her. So I opened up. And after essentially telling her my life story, I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "Mark, you've been through so much," she said. "I want you to know I'm here for you, no matter what." I didn't expect a manager to be someone to show such empathy and compassion. But after that day, I knew Susan would always have my back. Suddenly, I felt invigorated. We began meeting often to discuss how she could help me succeed, and I began making progress. I took on new projects and excelled. Susan had faith in me, and I felt inspired. Susan established trust and strengthened our relationship with her empathy, acknowledgement of my feelings, and compassion. She made a conscious effort not to just hear my words, but the story I was telling. She embraced my vulnerability, which gave me the freedom to be completely open and honest without the fear of judgment. And she provided a psychologically safe space where I felt empowered to bring my whole self to work instead of wearing a mask that could crack at any moment. I'm coming up on 20 years in that same company now, and I am the most fulfilled I have ever been. With Susan's support, it was easy to stay, knowing that there are managers who place such importance on mental wellness. And thanks to Susan's encouragement, I've evolved into a leader in this space, actively working to make change on the corporate scale by guiding and educating others, breaking all kinds of stigma along the way. Whether having to manage a mental illness or not, all employees want to be seen as top performers. We want the business to succeed and feel like we contribute to that success. But many of us are struggling due to anxiety, depression, and other types of mental illness. Added to this, many of us are trying to manage side effects from the medications we're on, which can range from drowsiness and unpredictable GI issues to hallucinations and even suicidal ideations. It can be completely overwhelming at the idea of trying to be our best when dealing with all this and feeling like it's not okay to ask for help. According to Mental Health America, 3 in 5 employees feel they aren't receiving adequate support from their managers when it comes to mental health. That's 3 out of 5. This absolutely shows the importance of managers taking a step back from projects every now and then to openly connect with their employees on a more personal level. By providing a psychologically safe space and appreciating the struggles your employees are going through, you will see that they feel even more inspired to be their best, truest, most authentic selves each day. Here are just a few strategies you can put in place to create a culture where mental health is valued and supported. Have a coffee or tea. Genuinely ask how your employees are doing. Actively listen. Show kindness, empathy, compassion, and understanding without judgment. Ensure your employees feel valued and included. Ask how you can help when help is needed. Embrace and role model vulnerability yourselves. And by having this level of understanding, you will foster a strong bond and unbreakable trust among the entire organization. Start and participate in a support group, allowing employees to connect with each other, share resources, and gain new insights. Start and participate in a program led by mental health champions, offering training on how to communicate about mental illness in a healthy way. Help establish a support line where employees can connect with therapists when needed, or even bring a therapist on site once or twice a week. Help bring in an external speaker to talk about the mental health struggles that many employees face. Give Fridays, or at least Friday afternoons off, as an opportunity for your employees and yourselves to rest and recharge after a long, hard week to focus on wellness and self-care. Provide quiet spaces where your employees can go for meditation, prayer, deep breathing, Tai Chi, or yoga, and support them using these resources. And by the way, I can testify that the bathroom stall is not a quiet space. So, bosses, whether at a Fortune 500 company, nonprofit, public service sector, fast food restaurant, or any place where there are leaders, you will be amazed at how the business can benefit when you are guiding, supporting, and encouraging your employees this way. And when employees open up to you about their panic attacks, depressive episodes, suicidal ideations, or more, you'll have a much better idea of what to say and be able to share the most helpful resources that are available to them. And you won't just help your employees become stronger, more inspired, and confident, which will only help the business to succeed. You might just save a life.
Mark Bailey's experience of struggling with mental health challenges at work is not uncommon, yet the actions of his supervisor were simple yet extraordinary. The empathy and compassion shown to Mark was clearly a pivotal moment for him and seemingly changed the trajectory of his employment in a positive way. Welcome to the first session of Mental Health and Wellness in the Workplace. I'm Julie Surovich, Dean of the College of Behavioral and Community Sciences here at the University of South Florida. The college has partnered with a community agency serving the mental and emotional needs of the Tampa Bay community to produce this course, and we are excited to have you join us. With me today is Clara Reynolds, the Executive Director of the Crisis Center of Tampa Bay and a licensed clinical social worker.
Thank you, Dr. Surovich. I'm thrilled to partner with the College of Behavioral and Community Sciences at the University of South Florida for this important work. The Crisis Center of Tampa Bay is a nonprofit whose mission is to ensure that no one in our community has to face crisis alone. Simply put, we help people struggling with a life crisis connect with services and supports to alleviate that crisis. And that crisis can be anything from food shortage to basic needs, mental health or crisis, or even somebody who's struggling with rape or other trauma. As CEO, I understand there are work-related deliverables that must be accomplished. Like you, I have financial metrics that must be met. However, I also understand that our business model, probably like yours, requires staff who are healthy, both physically and mentally. As Mark Bailey so aptly detailed, your staff bring their entire selves with them to work every day.
Most people living with a behavioral or mental health disorder are perfectly capable of working in a rewarding career, and it is critical that we build healthy organizational structures to protect both the well-being of our team members as well as the impact on our organization's bottom line. Employees who experience mental and behavioral health issues may struggle with productivity due to tardiness, numerous leaves of absences, lethargy, medication side effects, and a whole host of other reasons. One study showed that depression alone costs businesses billions each year.
And it's not just your employees who may be struggling. They may have a family member who is really struggling. They could have a child that is staying up all hours of the night because of their anxiety. They could have a spouse whose erratic behavior might result in domestic violence. They could have an elderly parent struggling with Alzheimer's or dementia who can't be left alone. No one is at their best the next day, let alone performing at their peak when they are struggling with these types of issues. This course will teach you prevalence rates and symptoms of the most common mental and behavioral disorders, what to look for in an employee's behavior that suggests impairment and how to approach the issue, and what resources you should consider to assist your business attract and retain the top talent.
That's right, Claire. It's also important to know that this course is not an attempt to teach you how to diagnose or treat employees' mental, behavioral, and or emotional struggles. We are not advocating that businesses replace trained mental health professionals, and we are not suggesting a surveillance of your workforce. Our focus is on learning to detect a possible problem and address it in a manner that hopefully will lead to healthy outcomes for your employee and business. We will also explore how to access readily available resources in your community and nationwide.
This course isn't just focused on mental health and substance disorders. It's also focused on wellness. So before we dive in further, let's define what we mean by wellness. Wellness is the act of practicing healthy habits on a daily basis to attain better physical and mental health outcomes. Wellness moves us not just from surviving, but to thriving. There are 5 main dimensions of wellness: social connectedness, exercise, nutrition, sleep, and mindfulness. Throughout the course, we're going to devote time during each session to highlight wellness activities that you can use immediately to improve your mental well-being and those you work or live with.
Before we get started, let's lay out some instructions for making this a successful experience for you. First, this is a self-paced course. Each session is comprised of lectures, panels, videos, and interviews that run from 15 minutes to about an hour, with pauses in between. This will offer you an opportunity to stop and start each session as you need. In fact, you can pause at any time and even repeat a section should you choose to do so. If you would like to earn the USF certification and digital badge for completing the course, we will provide more information on how to register later in the program. If you have questions, take a look at the frequently asked questions on our website at usf.edu/MHWW. If you don't find an answer there, or if you have other comments about the course or questions you'd like, please email us at mentalhealthandwellness@usf.edu. Finally, a new session will be shared every Monday until all 7 sessions are available. Feel free to progress through the sessions at your own pace.
I also want to highlight that some of the topics covered in this course may impact you more than others. You may experience feelings of discomfort or anxiety. You may also experience strong emotional reactions like fear, shock, or worry because something discussed made you remember something bad that happened to you in the past. These feelings are referred to as triggers or stressors. If you experience any feelings of distress, please stop the session. Take 4 to 5 big, deep breaths to bring your body back to a level of calm. Once you have calmed your body, take a look around you to remind yourself that you're safe, that you've experienced a reaction to memories, not what's actually happening. Then engage in a pleasant activity, something like taking a walk, reading, coloring, playing an instrument, singing, anything that gives you a break and a chance to regroup. Once you're more comfortable, go back to the session. If going back to that session provides too much anxiety, you can skip and move to another section. As we discussed earlier, wellness is an art that must be practiced daily. Dr. Sarovich and I encourage you to develop and incorporate self-care into your daily practice. Make a goal right now to use some of the techniques provided during the sessions for a month and see how you feel. I promise you'll be really, really surprised.
So now let's take a look at the upcoming sessions. In session 2, we will be talking about workplace culture and addressing the questions, how can workplace culture transform itself to keep up with our changing world? What are workers and leaders looking for in a healthy workplace? And how does this impact mental health?
In session 3, we will focus on foundations, an introduction to the history and terminology related to mental health, behavioral health, and addiction. This will truly give you the starting point that you'll need throughout the entire sessions.
In session 4, you will learn more about the most prevalent mental, behavioral, and addiction challenges facing the workforce. This is not about diagnosis, but rather what we look for in a colleague that might indicate a problem.
Session 5 will focus on approach, how to approach someone who may be living with mental health, behavioral health, or addiction challenges.
To one degree or another, we have all experienced trauma and maybe even thoughts of suicide. In session 6, we discuss types of traumas, as well as the myths, facts, and signs of suicidal ideation.
Session 7 will focus exclusively on wellness, exploring resources available to support the wellness of employees. Now, we'll have wellness embedded in all of the sessions, but this one is dedicated specifically to the topic of wellness.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Mario Hernandez. I'm a recently retired professor and former chair of the Department of Child and Family Studies in the College of Community and Behavioral Sciences. I'm very excited to be here today with in this panel discussion. And thank you all for joining and listening to this first panel discussion in our 7-session course on mental health and wellness in the workplace. From the onset of the development of this course, our USF team of professionals in mental health and substance use have actively sought out the input and feedback from people in corporate America as well as the nonprofit world. We've also talked to employees and gotten input from them as well. All of that input has been incorporated as much as possible into the context along with the research that supports it. What we've received, what our team has received, is an overwhelming positive support and acknowledgement for the need for this type of coursework. The need is to also help employers know how to implement this and employees how to participate. So generally, it's been overwhelmingly positive, and this thing is on the right track, and people just need the strategies in order to know how to actually make this a real thing in their workplaces. In our research, we've also talked to employees, people who work in these places. And this generation of employees, it's interesting, there's a change in sort of attitudes towards the separation between work and personal life, and also in terms of not experiencing the traditional stigma that's often been associated with mental health issues or talking about family issues. And I see that as a very positive thing. Stigma has been one of the big barriers in people seeking help and or talking to their friends and loved ones about what they're experiencing. And so problems sometimes get out of hand when we keep it inside because we're afraid to share what's going on. So the workforce is changing. And of course, with more people wanting to work from home, that also has kind of accelerated some of these expectations about what's at work and what's home and what's personal. There's also been, it hasn't all been happy and positive, there's been some employers that have expressed concerns for various reasons. One is, oh my gosh, what's this new generation of workers? What are they going to expect? How are they going to change my organization? Is this something we should even be doing? Or I already have an employee assistance program, EAP. So doesn't that take care of it? It's just the job is to make a referral. So getting the concept of a healthy mental health and wellness workplace isn't part of just making a referral. You see what I mean? We also have had concerns by small businesses, and you can imagine your size might have a big impact on what you're able to do with employees if your workforce is small or your budgets aren't the same. And the bottom line for all of it is, what does this do to the bottom line? Are we going to accomplish what we accomplish? Is this kind of stuff going to get in the way, or is it helpful? We also have done research and learned that there's a lot of businesses and places around the country, and there's research going on about strategies that employers can implement in the workplace. Some people have, you've probably heard of some of these, yoga on site, wellness days, gyms, things that maybe help people deal with stress and again, create less of a separation between work and home. And also even this wellness days, unlimited leave. So, some of these things are scary for some employers and they don't understand. And of course, not everybody has to do the same things, but there are a lot of organizations out there across our country where they are doing this, and it's having very positive results in terms of, especially in this day, we're having issues with holding on to employees and having enough employees to do the work. So this course has researched that. We've heard from people, and we've incorporated that all into what we're doing in terms of this course. I want to introduce our panelists. We hope to have an informal discussion. We haven't scripted this. I want to introduce Yvette Segura, who's has been a senior level executive in her career. A lot of it has been with USAA Insurance. Also, Jessica Muroff, who's a chief executive officer of Suncoast United Way, and has extensive experience in understanding these issues in the nonprofit world, which is also critical and important. And again, nonprofits range from large ones, like a YMCA, to smaller mom and pop. So the same issues are there. Ed Narain, who is current vice president of external and legislative affairs at AT&T. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to start by just picking on one of you. I'm going to be asking I have some questions here, and I'm going to be reading the questions to make sure that I get them correct. So my first question, I'm going to ask Yvette. You all have been leaders of rather large companies or organizations for many years. Over time in your career, what have you seen in terms of, trends in terms of addressing mental and behavioral health, as well as addictions in your workplaces?
Thanks. And thanks, Mario, for including me on this panel. I think it's a super important topic that all employers need to consider when it comes to their workforce. And so I've seen this evolution over my 37-year career when I was working in corporate America, to see it evolve really over time. So where it wasn't discussed at all, really it being up to the employee to deal with their issues, to situations where then actually kind of not wanting to talk about it at all even further because, oh, there's HIPAA and now we're really worried about saying the wrong thing, to then saying, okay, wait a minute, yes, there's HIPAA, but there's still ways to be a good leader, and to still take into account your team and those people that are coming to work every day trying to show up, and how do they show up. So then you enter the pandemic, and that really put everything on the forefront. And I think many companies were faced with, you have to deal with it or you have to deal with it in one way or another, because you can either deal with it by handling and addressing some of those concerns with the current workforce, or you handle it by continually turning over employees and trying to onboard new ones. And we know that that's an expensive business model too.
Yeah.
So I've seen that evolution. And I think that as employers go beyond the offering of employee assistance programs to then also thinking about, what does that work environment look like? What does it feel like? What does the leadership do to create this environment where people want to show up every day, where they want to come and serve the mission? Because no company is any better in terms of their ability to execute on their mission. They're no better than that individual employee who's showing up every day, right? So they're doing the work of the work. What is it how do you want them to show up? How do you want them to deliver on your company's mission, no matter what size you are?
I saw a lot of head nods as you were talking from Ed and from Jessica. Would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, sure. I think, Yvette, you just laid the perfect foundation for it, where, as leaders of our organizations, we have to address these things and be creative in our ways of offering support and resources to our team. At United Way Suncoast, and this was offered as an optional thing, but 2/3 of our team became mental health first aid certified, so that we offered that training to them so that we all had this resource to not only support one another, but support our community in our mission. But we've also been very creative in the ways that we are supporting wellness in support of our team. We offer a $25 stipend every month called Thrive Pass, where our team can utilize that for any wellness activity they would like to have. We have a Suncoast Steps Challenge, where we are constantly challenging each other to get up and move. Because just as Yvette said, what we experience in our personal and home life does not stop at the door when we walk into work. And being able to have more comprehensive resources not only improves their engagement and their happiness at work, it also improves our ability to deliver those services to others. So as much as we're taking care of our community, we have to take care of our team first.
Jessica, have you seen the employees be more receptive than you were expecting?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you just really have to look comprehensively at how you're supporting them, and the resources and opportunities that you're giving them. I can't tell you how many times we've had, just because of the last 3 years that all of us have experienced, there's been one crisis after another, both on big scales and then also very personally with our team. And because we've created an atmosphere in our organization where you're really facing some challenges, for sure that your team is going to be behind you and give you the support and resources to get through it.
Yeah.
Ed?
I was just going to add that I think, one of the changes that I've seen over the last 20 plus years with my company is that they've taken those benefits that normally just stuck with the employee and actually extended those to every member of the family. So whether it's, the free online therapy sessions or in person, it's not just the employee of record, but their family members that can take advantage of that. Now, if you're a smaller company out there, you're probably thinking, well, I can't afford to do that. But in reality, these plans, because America's been dealing with such a crisis in terms of mental health, the costs of these plans have gone down. And of course, things like the internet and programs like Zoom and Microsoft Teams has made it so that you don't necessarily have to travel to get the mental health service that you need. You can do it right from your home. So to see corporate America basically embrace really serious crisis that we're all struggling with in our companies and just say, hey, we're going to do something about it, not just for the employee, but for the families, has just been a godsend, I got to tell you, for a lot of large organizations.
It's brilliant. And at the same time, it's sort of a no-brainer, because we all know that you don't check it at the door, but you don't check your family's issues at the door either. If you're dealing with a situation with someone in your family you're bringing that, you're living with it. So I think that's fantastic.
That's great. So given what you all have just shared, kind of takes me to the next question. This is about what maybe your ideas about what role you think management can play in helping employees in these areas, and not just employees as individuals, but also in supporting a workplace culture that promotes mental health and wellness. Do you have suggestions for management of what strategies or what things they can do?
First and foremost, you have to have a strategy. So this isn't something that you can just say, yeah, like, oh, I see that best practice, or I see that. Like, you really have to make sure as a management team, a leadership team, that you establish this as a priority in your organization, that your organization in total understands it as a priority to you, and all the things that you are doing, the strategies that you're employing to make sure that it's fully resourced and supported within the organization. So it really is just asserting that priority, making sure your organization knows that it's a priority to you, and then having all of the follow-up and the strategies in place to make it happen.
I would also say it's important for organizations to be willing to promote mental health awareness as well in the workplace. Oftentimes, you're going to spend more time with employees or coworkers than you do with your own family, actually pulled on,
Yes.
on a weekly basis. So making sure that you have a culture is important, but also that you're promoting that, hey, mental illness, mental health issues are just as serious as a physical issue. I think, creating accommodations for employees, like if you had someone who, in my case, I injured my back last year, and so the job provided accommodations for me. We should be doing the same thing for people who are dealing with mental health crises, but you have to have a culture that embraces that. I also think our leaders have to be willing to lead by example. They have to also be willing to listen. How often have we heard our employees hey, I'm stressed out? You can't just take that on face value. You should have a good enough relationship with that employee to say, well, what do you mean by stressed out? What's going on? Because it could be something as serious as them going through a divorce at home that they don't really want to talk about or share, but there's a lot of stress that's associated with it. It could be that they're caring for a sick parent, and that's a new situation for most people, and they don't know how to resolve it. And so as a leader, you're able to point them to the resources that maybe they didn't even know were available from a company that can help alleviate some of that stress. So I think having that relationship and having the right culture in your organization is key.
How does a manager make themselves appear open to an employee to come and talk to your supervisor? I mean,
Well, I think it happens as a leader. You can't think that when somebody is maybe exhibiting some sort of a mental health crisis or something's just a little bit off, you can't think that all of a sudden you say, oh, just let's talk about it. Without having prior developed a relationship of transparency and openness. This is something that has to be developed as a relationship with your team. If you want the best out of your team, just to have the best productivity, you've got to create that right environment. So it starts at the top, as Jessica mentioned, from a strategy standpoint, with what's the culture of the organization, right? So what's the culture of the organization, and how does that organization feel and demonstrate openness, transparency, communication? Are the leaders expected to have regular one-on-ones with their team to talk about whatever that employee wants to talk about, their progress in the organization, what's the next step for them, just how they're doing, anything like that. I mean, you have to build the relationship in order for an employee to feel comfortable enough to come in and say, hey, I need to talk to you about something that's going on with me. Or for the employee or for the leader to be in a position to actually expect an answer by saying, hey, is everything okay? You're not going to get an answer of truth or of honesty unless you've developed that relationship already. It's critically important. It can't happen when there's a problem. That can't be the start.
Yeah, I think you also have to tie in emotional intelligence to that, right?
Absolutely.
Your leaders have to be aware enough to know, one, that something is different about the employee and what's taking place, and have the intelligence to say, okay, how do I engage with this person in this particular moment? And earlier I mentioned like leading by example. And what I mean by that is, as leaders, we can't be exempt or try to show ourselves exempt from the same problems that our direct reports would have. I'll give you a great example. Fortunately, all of us have dealt with bereavement situations, and companies are really good about saying, here's your time off, and, take the time that you need and come back. But as a leader, if you've gone through this, have you shared with your direct reports, hey, this is how I'm dealing with this. Here's what's going on right now. Because when you show yourself vulnerable and establish, hey, I'm a human being just like you are, it gives your other folks in the organization the freedom to do the same. So it goes back to what Yvette and Jessica said. It's about creating the culture, but leading yourself in order for people to feel comfortable enough to share with you because you've shared with them.
Yeah, your own vulnerability, being able to share that. I think that's a great point.
Yeah. We've spoken to CEOs who believe mental health, behavioral health, and addictions are a personal issue. I mentioned this in my introduction, and doesn't need to be brought into the workplace. Again, at this point in time, I think that's a traditional view. Why do you think that is? I mean, why do you think some managers, employers really want this separation? That's the first part of the question. Is there some danger there that you all can foresee? Because, we want to have a discussion where we talk about, this whole thing from everybody's perspective today. And then what would you say to them to ease their concerns so that what would you say, which is what maybe could be then incorporated into one of the courses? Ed, do you want to start?
Sure, Professor. I would say I think some of it is a generational divide, right? You look at your senior leadership team, many are from a different generation than they're actually leading or working with. And I'll give you an example. You have your baby boomers who are, closer to retirement now, but are still leading a lot of organizations. And when they were coming up the ladder in their careers, mental health wasn't something that was talked about. To Yvette's first point today, it was something that people just said, hey, you deal with that on your own. So now you're leading an organization that's full of Gen Xers, Gen Yers, millennials, and they are actually a lot more in tune with the idea of, hey, I need to take a mental health day. Something that the baby boomer generation is like, a mental health day, what's that? You need to be here at work tomorrow on time. So I think it's, not just a lack of awareness as much as there's a generational divide in terms of how mental health issues have been treated. And I think that's what you're seeing mostly in your survey results.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think that's true.
And if you look at like the media and how they're talking about these dynamics in the workplace, you've heard things called like the Sunday scaries, quiet quitting, and Yvette talked about, the impacts of not addressing these things and having the support and resources placed on team turnover and engagement. All of this impacts the bottom line of our organizations, and we cannot afford to not address it, which is why we're seeing more and more organizations doing that, because they're realizing that gone are the days that you can that you ignore this.
Absolutely. And it's a little, I guess I'm a little dumbfounded by the idea that an organization would not want to address it or even acknowledge it in the workplace. And yet I saw a study that the Society for Human Resources Management, SHRM, recently completed last year that said less than 1 in 3 employers put mental health of their employees as a priority. So it sounds like on the one hand, they recognize that it's there, but they're not putting it as a priority to address. And I'm a firm believer that your customer experience is only as good as your employee experience, right? I mean, I know that I'm not in the minority there in terms of understanding that basic logic. So as an employer, you're not willing to address the elephant in the room, then you're going to be addressing it through turnover. And it's a basic, math problem at that point. And so both current employees and prospective employees are looking at employers to see what is the environment that's created for them? What are the benefits that they are provided so that they can show up as their best selves every day? We want that. We want people to show up wanting to be there first, and then wanting to come in and perform as they've been hired to do. And I think people will genuinely want to do that. They just have to have the right environment where they feel satisfied, appreciated, and true confessions here. But, I remember, maybe 20 years ago, at my former employer, they installed activity rooms and quiet rooms as well as break rooms. And being a boomer, I was like, are there clocks in those quiet rooms? Because who's going to remember to wake up from that nap? I was worried about that. I was worried about them getting back from break. I was the one worried about it. everybody seemed to get back to work. And, different environments call for different levels of flexibility that's available. If you're dealing with, call center environments, manufacturing environments where you require and you need people to be, in a place doing a certain thing at certain schedules, then the way you create that environment, it might look a little bit different, but it doesn't mean you say, oh, we can't do that here. No, you can do it. You just might have to do it differently in order to create that encouraging, motivating workspace that people feel comfortable coming to. And if they are dealing with an issue, that they feel comfortable enough being able to have that conversation with their leader.
It sounds like in terms of unseen danger, part B of the question, you all are suggesting that it's more dangerous not to address it, which is interesting. Also, Ed, you mentioned, generational differences. And I think that's part of the fear and the dangers is that I think people see mental health in extremes where now every time there's gun violence, it's, mental health. And so where the reality is that probably 95% of the people who experience mental health issues and substance use issues are people like us and the people that, work for us. And, they say anxiety and depression are like the common cold in mental health. And so I think that's part of this stigma barrier. And also this people only see extremes. They don't really see the fact that most people just have life situations and there are things that if we deal with them directly, it eases stress as opposed to increase it. I like that point you made about the generations, but I think a lot of people think in extremes when it comes to mental health. All right. So I'm going to read a little bit here because there's some statistics in this question. A recent survey by ZipRecruiter found that 44% of graduates want a hybrid work arrangement, while 33% want to be fully remote, leaving only 23% who want to be in the office every day. A disconnect between how you work, how you want to work, and how you do work can put strains on both the employee and the employer. And I see that already. I even see it in our work. Another survey by Cisco found that 79% of employees felt remote work has improved the work-life balance, and 80% said remote work made them happier. Studies on the impact of remote work on mental health, however, are mixed, with some suggesting that remote workers experience an increased likelihood of anxiety and depressive symptoms. One of the things that you get used to in my recent retirement is you don't have the same social world that you used to have every day. And so you're more alone. It's something new. So where do you see remote work going in the future? And are you concerned about not seeing your employees in person? And how does that relate to this whole workforce culture of wellness?
I think the future of remote work is in hybrid opportunities, right? I don't think there are certain positions that you have to have people together. They have to be working together. If you think of factories and assembly lines, I think that's not going to change where you have people who have to be side by side and on a daily basis. The contrast of that may be call centers. The advent of technology allows for people to have internet connections in their home that are high speed. They can take those calls from their home if they have a home office. We've seen this over the years with companies who actually globalize their workforce. And instead of having a call center in the United States, they have it in another country because they found it to be cheaper. So there are always going to be positions that can be done remotely. But the contrast is you have positions that require a lot of collaboration. So I don't think it's going to be an either or, but I think it's going to be a combination in the future of the two. And that alone will provide great flexibility for people who maybe they have small children. And I can speak from my own example where, there have been times my daughters have been sick and the ability to work from the house and take care of them was helpful to reduce a ton of the stress I normally would have been under trying to find them a last minute sitter so that I could go into the office to basically do some of the same things I could do from home. So I think hybrid is going to be the future. I don't think it's going to be all or nothing.
I agree with Ed. I think hybrid is the future. In fact, we are totally redesigning our offices and reducing our footprint by half to accommodate this request from our team. So it's really critically important to also listen to your team and what their needs are And then, yes, the hybrid work environment, but we've created an environment where it is very collaborative. It has the spaces that Yvette talked about, that it's inspirational, so that when teammates do come together, they can come together in creative and impactful ways and not just sit behind a cubicle. And so I think that creating a destination and a workplace that is important for our team, that suits their needs, is important for our team. And then you also have to design and make sure that you're intentionally bringing together your team outside of that hybrid work environment. So 3 days a week, our entire organization comes together at 4:30 p.m. virtually for what's called the huddle. And we've been doing this for 3 years. And it's a way to just bring our entire team together to share and to, get out a lot of good information and just to be together. We volunteer together. I mean, we are United Way, but we appreciate the opportunities to come together in person and serve our community. And then we also make sure that we have planned in-person meetings mixed in with our remote meetings so that there is this good balance and blend of both so that connectivity stays there.
Have any of you found this hybrid environment? Of course, we went from a non-hybrid; it was almost to the extreme. Have you found that for some employees, of course, not all, it's become more stressful? Like it's exacerbated their mental health issues. You found that to be true or not?
I don't know, I guess is my answer, because I think that Ed is spot on in that this hybrid approach and collaboration, I think, is important on so many levels. Whether it's the job itself from a project management kind of thing that you need to sit down across the table from each other to just coming together periodically. I think that collaboration says a lot about a team's ability to really gel and produce and perform. So I don't know if that is the case. Probably there's some degree of it if people have reduced themselves to one vehicle and there's more than one person going to work in a day, or, just trying to figure those things out. And I think that it's at the same time recognizing the importance of that collaboration and the expectation. If there is an expectation of showing up 5 days a month or whatever, 2 days a week, whatever that is, that, people are given enough notice so that they understand, okay, here are those days that I'm supposed to show up and I've got to make arrangements for that. But that can't just be sprung on a person either, so that they can get those arrangements made and not have that stress about how to make that happen.
Mario, I dare argue that there's a little bit of a generational divide when it comes to remote work and in-person work as well, right? As a Gen Xer, I have no problem having a routine and getting up every day and going to the office and repeating that the next day. There's a couple of generations behind me that they grew up with cell phones in their hands and their interactions are largely in isolation. So they're used to being behind a screen, interacting with another person. So we're looking at a confluence of all these generations coming together in a workplace and how we actually make that work. Now, I do share some of the same concerns that somebody out there might be listening and thinking about. And we even saw this expressed last week by the Surgeon General of the United States when he said, we have a problem with people being lonely and isolation. And that has a lot to do with the COVID period that we just came out of, where for the last 3 years, people were by themselves or, stuck with a loved one in a household. And it was just the two of them or maybe by themselves looking at the screen. And that's, if you think about everything that we do as a culture, whether it be from school to church or even going out to eat, we do that together. So the idea that you would be home working alone and forced to do it the last few years has been tough on a lot of people in our society. So we shouldn't ignore that.
So perhaps what you're suggesting is that, as you said, things are not going to go back the way they were before COVID, but this hybrid model. And it could very well be that for some people, for their behavioral health or sense of wellness, having hybrid is good. For other people who maybe live alone, they might like to come into the office. Mm-hmm. So, it's another area it's an unknown that we're entering now, but it can work either way depending upon that particular person's situation. Okay, so this next question, I find it interesting. It's called UPTO. We have acronyms for everything. Unlimited personal time off as a benefit has gained popularity among employers. Yet some suggest that it can lead to employees working more and thus creating more stress. What is your experience with unlimited personal time off? Have you heard of it? Do you know of any place that has that?
And
I've heard of
don't,
it. We
yeah.
haven't implemented it. We have very generous paid time off policies. And over the summer, we have Freedom Fridays where you wrap up at noon so you can start the weekend a little bit early. But I think that the concept, I think the idea is a noble idea, but I do think that having, a set of days that you need to use, right? And that you're constantly having this conversation. I think it's more about the dialogue of hey, have you taken a break? Have you taken some time off? And making that a more practice conversation, to make sure that your teammates are and your employees are, taking the breaks that they need is important. I don't know that, having unlimited personal time off is the answer to cracking that code, more of having the culture and the conversations with your team to make sure that they feel supported to do that. And when they do take the break, that they can take the break, that they're not being interrupted by, that there's good contingency and backup plans to support your teammates actually taking that break that they need.
I want to go to work at United Way Suncoast. I just really love everything that, the whole notion of unlimited personal time off sounds, you hear about it and you think, wow, how cool is that? I could have as much time off as I wanted. And yet, like anything, the devil's in the details for organizations and even for individuals in terms of understanding how do you actually do that? So for an organization, how do you do that? You can't just change the policy. There's a lot of detail within that to include the communication about what that looks like and how that looks. And then for employees too, to really understand what that means. There are examples of situations where you have unlimited time off and yet people still travel with their laptop and, all their work devices because they're still working while they're on vacation. And then small companies really struggle to figure out how to do that. It works better for certain types of industries and it works better for larger organizations. You have to have the right amount of coverage or people there to get the work done. And so again, devil's always in the details, but I like the idea and the approach that Jessica and her team have taken in terms of just the, understanding and recognizing and respecting the need to take time off. And the Freedom Fridays, that's pretty cool. I like that. I'm applying.
Mario, what I'll share with this panel is I'm not very familiar with the unlimited time off policies that are out there, but I am familiar with the unlimited sick time policies that are out there. My company instituted a few years ago for employees, and there are guardrails that are put in up to 5 days. And after 5 days, they do require some accountability. We need to know that you really are sick or you're dealing with a medical issue. And so we require a doctor's note to kind of, and obviously at a certain period of time, short-term disability would take over. And then fortunately, long-term, depending on the situation. So we're basically signaling to our employees, hey, if you're sick, if you're dealing with a mental illness that isn't, resolved by just taking time off, you can go and get the help you need and the company is going to back you. But I'll tell you this, I think a lot of companies have a lot of self-starters that are working for them, especially at the managerial ranks. And that's where you have a lot of problems because people who are self-starters typically tend not to use their paid time off. We find as at the end of the year, the last quarter of the year, we're reminding people, hey, you didn't use your vacation. You need to start using this. I hate to sound like a broken record, but it's generational again.
Yeah.
And these devices here keep you tethered to your company 24/7, it would seem like. And so I think it's important for employers to stress to their employees that, hey, once you're done with your workday, you need to put your device away. If you have a home office, put it in a home office. Maybe you want to check it before you go to bed, depending on what level of management you are. But other than that, put it away. You're on time. First thing in the morning, and I think most of us in America were guilty of this, is we take our phones and we want to see what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's just not a healthy habit. But again, you're dealing with self-starters. So, employers really have to be mindful of that and have to stress to them, hey, when you're on your time, to the points that were made earlier, you're on your time. Untether from your devices and really, enjoy your life.
Yeah. And again, all these things that you all are sharing with us today, they're all about the management's mindset about how a manager thinks about this, how you have a long view of what's really going to be the best for your workforce, and that burning people out or letting them burn themselves out isn't always the best thing. So I think that's part of what we hope to accomplish is how do we in this 7-session course, how do we help people to understand some of these mental health and substance use issues, and how do we change a mindset that pays attention to that, what you were just saying, Ed? So we're coming to our last question, and it's also okay if there's anything you think that my questions have missed that you want to add. I would appreciate that at the end. That would be very, very helpful. But I want to pick on Jessica because she's in the unique position of having worked in nonprofits. Ed, I think you also have some experience, especially with your work like on the Children's Board and Con Memorial, where you visit, different nonprofits. What do you see in the nonprofit world in terms of this same issue of how do nonprofits create these positive mental health cultures in their workplaces?
So I see them working really hard to this end because our nonprofit partners are struggling with turnover. This is something that, is just hard because in the last 3 years, we have just been dealing with crisis after crisis. And, our teammates experience compassion fatigue. And it's really hard to consistently hear and help, which is what our hearts and is what our, life's mission is to do in serving others. But just the constant flow of the really hard things that our community is facing right now is incredibly difficult. So some things and we've been hearing this from our nonprofit partners for a few years now. And I do see our partners getting creative, just like we have in their support and resources to their teams. One thing that our teammates have also created is because we have some of our team who do work directly in community supporting and serving people and doing that every single day, even through COVID. And so, those front line, those first responders type, we developed a bench training program to help make sure that we were offering some strength to them too, so that they could take some time off or they could, get the support of others on the team. So it wasn't just them being out there and supporting. So you've got to be creative in the way that you're addressing that. But it is definitely, making sure that you're wrapping around all the resources possible to keep your team and that experience and that service in place, because it's been very hard for us given all of the crisis that we've had to respond to.
Yeah, and some of our nonprofit, the employees, they work with very challenging people, families, situations. Some of them are very heartfelt to us. You go home, you can't stop thinking about it. It's a different, there's a difference in terms of where you go to work, but your work has really nothing to do with that level of seeing personal pain and agony in people and how you carry that. It just seems like there'd be different kinds of strategies for those kinds of nonprofits. And we have some, there's some large ones like, Feeding Tampa Bay, Metropolitan Ministries. There's some pretty large organizations. And it's just it's like the work environment creates some of the mental health and stress issues and school employees also as well, for example. Ed, do you want to add anything to this?
I think Jessica is spot on. I'll say, the crisis that our community has been in and others across the country has definitely put a strain on those who are working in a nonprofit space. A big part of it is, you just don't have the financial resources to pay people what they're worth in a lot of those positions. Not doing it for money, they do it because they care. And it's a very hard thing to get home at night and turn that situation off when maybe you're dealing with children and you're concerned about, where this child might be even sleeping that night. So we've seen the stress levels rise. I know the Children's Board in particular has put a lot of money behind mental health, not just for the child, but also for a lot of the caregivers that we fund and through those programs. It's really a tough time out there. And, we can just encourage people this is where the self-care comes into larger play. We also have to be more in tune with ourselves to know, hey, you know what? I'm reaching this point where I'm going to burn out or I'm going to act out, based off of how I'm feeling, and being able to intercept those feelings and then do what's necessary to kind of get yourself recentered before entering back in the fray. That's something we have to invest more time in teaching people how to do. But once we learn how to do that, I think we're going to be in a better place. But it's just very, very tough right now for our nonprofit partners.
Yeah. Yvette, anything you want to add to this?
Well, I think Jessica and Ed have just hit the nail on the head when it comes to the nonprofit space and the importance of that. And I guess what I would say from a general standpoint, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, is there's a real war on talent. We know that the workforce, the numbers are smaller than the need. And so employers, organizations have got to take this issue seriously. Employees, prospective employees, I think are much more savvy as they should be to really take a look at what an organization, what a potential employer offers in the way of benefits or just culture and mission and purpose. Those are the things that will, first of all, get them again to show up and then to stay. And being mindful of mental health in the workplace and being able to respond to it starts at the top of an organization, and that will permeate throughout the organization in terms of how it's treated. And so I think it's essential that it's incorporated, as Ed was pointing out, not just looking at physical limitations, but also mental health challenges that people may be facing.
Thank you. So is there anything in closing that maybe I didn't ask or that we missed that you think is kind of a last message you want to give?
I think what Yvette just said was perfect. I think it has to be a priority and it starts from the top and then that has to be, ingrained in your entire workplace. So kudos, Yvette. That was awesome.
And I would just encourage, if you're a smaller business out there, to, think about talking directly to your employees about what they think would make your organization better for them. You don't have an enterprise organization like mine where you can put out a survey and get all this feedback and then process the information. But what you do have is the ability to sit down with your employees one-on-one and ask them the question, what can I do to make this work environment better for you? And be open to hearing some things that may be a little bit tough if you ask them about, what the challenges they may be facing, and then actually implement some of those suggestions. Because I think there's a perception that if you're a smaller business, it's going to be too costly to do things to help people with their mental health. And nothing could be further from the truth. We're dealing with this environment where the great resignation took place with a lot of them. They said, hey, I'm too stressed out. I don't like this job. I don't want to work in it anymore. This is the time where small businesses can be agile and actually make smart strategic investments that can retain that talent that's so costly to replace. But the first thing you have to do is to be willing to listen and then implement some of those suggestions.
Yeah. I want to add, and I learned this from Patrick Kennedy's been involved with us, and we hope will be involved with this. He's agreed to, is be the change that you want to see, right? We've heard that so many times in our lives. In this case, he just, he was here, he was with me and a doctoral student, and he just spoke openly about his depression, his substance abuse issues. He talked about his mother. He just talked like it was, and he just kind of was the role model for I'm dealing with it. I'm not ashamed of it. It's me, and I can talk about it. And it just was like a role model to me of if you can be the change you're asking others to make by being open, you get rid of that stigma and that barrier breaks, and people are going to be more willing, to talk about this with their coworkers and with each other, even when they get together for lunch. Well, thank you very much. Any parting words? Or I really appreciate all of your wisdom and your insight. You all come from very different places. I was very intrigued to see how common your opinions and perspectives were, which means I think we're on the right track here. And I thank you very much for being a part of this panel.
Measuring the impact of undiagnosed mental, behavioral, and substance use challenges among employees is both very complicated and multidimensional. No one knows that better than Dr. Ron Getzel, who is a senior scientist and director of the Institute for Health and Productivity Studies at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Thanks for being here, Ron. Did I overstate the complexity of measuring impact?
Julie, I don't think so. I think it is a very complicated topic, which is why I've been doing this for several decades now. And in addition to looking at the return on investment, which is what all business owners and leaders want to hear about, I'm going to be talking much more about the value on investment, or the VOI, in addition to ROI.
Tell us more.
All right, Julia, I will. So that's the title of my presentation today. What's the value on investment for health and well-being programs? And thank you so much, Julie, for inviting me to present on this topic to all of you. So we are in very sorry state in many ways. The world is on fire, literally. We've got climate change going on. We've got wars overseas that are happening. We've got social unrest and political unrest going on all the time, all around us. So it's no wonder that we are all pretty upset. And not only that, but life has changed. I think that the COVID-19 pandemic, which hit us in 2020, really has made life different for all of us. So life before, not that we didn't care about anything, but I think we're in a very different space now in that we are very cognizant that health and public health specifically and economic health or business health are very much tied together. So we've got these overlapping crises going on. We've got pandemic, which is still out there. People still worry about that. We've got social movements and a struggling economy. So these can be summarized in terms of what we feel day in and day out, minute by moment: depression, anxiety, stress, disengagement, burnout. And like Tom Hanks says in the movie Apollo 13, Houston, we have a problem. So here's some global trends that are going on right now. There's a lot of outsourcing and right sizing. We've seen the great resignation during COVID-19, and now we're seeing some more layoffs all of a sudden looming their ugly heads. We've got reductions in force, global competition for talent, pressure for innovation, adaptation, reengineering, increased reliance on technology, and information overload. The fallout from all of this is on the employee and the employer. So increased job demands, detachment, depersonalization that we're feeling, increased healthcare usage, more absenteeism, low job morale, increased disability rates, on-the-job accidents, work-life imbalance, and in general, high stress embodying all of this. And a lot of what we've seen, and I think this has been exaggerated and increased over the past 3 years, is a lot more burnout. This is in response to work overload, chaotic or toxic work environments, time pressures, information overload, lack of job control, insufficient reward and recognition, breakdown of social relations, absence of fairness in applying work rules, conflicting organizational values, and exposure to toxic elements, including the virus. So essentially, these bullet points here on the right are the operational definition. Those are the factors that lead to burnout in the workplace. And the consequences of burnout can be felt both individually, but also organizationally. So individually, people have fatigue, mental and physical exhaustion, insomnia, sadness, depression, anger, irritability, alcohol, substance abuse, misuse rather, heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, vulnerability to other illnesses, family dysfunction, suicide. I don't know. I think if you haven't had these symptoms, you probably have them right now, as I've listed them off. But there's also a major spillover into the organization in terms of increased absenteeism, presenteeism, higher healthcare costs, and more safety incidents. So I think what COVID-19 pandemic has illustrated quite vividly is that mental health is public health. Even though public health is best known for addressing communicable diseases, every nation, every income bracket, many people endure debilitating mental disorders and dependency on drugs and alcohol that can destroy their quality of life and sometimes life itself. And it used to be that a fraction of the population was feeling this, actually had diagnosable mental disorders. Right now, if you ask people, it's really everyone is feeling stress, depression, anxiety, and a loss of well-being. It's really in the air at this point, not just on a select subset of people. So one of the lessons from COVID-19 is that our safety, our security, our economic prosperity are dependent on a robust public health system. In fact, we produced this report with support from the de Beaumont Foundation, which provided very practical ways in which the business community can align with public health for bold action and innovation in addressing the consequences of COVID-19. So what we know. Certainly risk factors, both physical and medical risk factors like heart disease and GI disorders and headaches are linked to psychosocial disorders, anxiety, aggression, irritability, apathy, boredom, depression, behavioral disorders, accidents, drug and alcohol abuse, eating disorders, smoking, and then major spillover into the organization. High absence rate, poor work relations, high turnover, low morale, job dissatisfaction, reduced productivity, and reduced readiness, especially if in your frontline first responders or the military. Not only that, we know that poor health is expensive, not just in terms of direct medical costs, but on various levels. So certainly we feel it in terms of our insurance claims. Medical and prescription drug costs have been increasing. Absence, work loss, disability, safety incidents, presenteeism. What that means is that people are physically at work, but mentally, psychologically, they may be somewhere else because they're worried about their own health or the health of their loved ones. And then there are underlying risk factors. These are modifiable risk factors, but they have significant impact on the economics of the business. So back in 1998, we published what was called the HERO study. And I'm referring to this as HERO 1 study because there are 2 subsequent studies, the same idea. The idea was to look at the medical costs of people with 10 modifiable risk factors. And I underscore and emphasize the word modifiable, meaning these things can be modified. These are not genetic predisposition or demographics, but things that potentially can be addressed through behavioral and organizational interventions. And we found out that back then, depression was the costliest condition. So if someone on a health assessment said, I'm depressed, even when you control for all the other risk factors on that health assessment, that turned out to be the most expensive condition 3 years forward. In fact, it cost on average about 70% more for people who had depression compared to those who didn't have depression, even after controlling for confounders. We did the study again in 2012, the HERO 2 study. This was published in the journal Health Affairs. And the headline here was 10 modifiable health risk factors are linked to more than 1/5 of employer-employee healthcare spending. And once again, we discovered, and this time we actually brought in prescription drug costs in addition to medical costs, that depression was still number 1. Depression was still the costliest risk factor out there. Here, about 50% higher costs for people who said they were depressed. And then we did the study one more time in 2020, the HERO 2 study, HERO 3 study rather. And this time what we did was different than before. Instead of looking 3 years forward, we looked at just 1 year, short-term increases in medical expenditures for people with these risk factors. And stress and depression came up as number 3 and 4 in terms of most costliest conditions. Number 1 and 2 were high blood glucose and obesity. So what does that tell us? It tells us that in terms of direct medical costs, these psychosocial risk factors are a big deal. They actually do have a substantial impact on future healthcare spending, even when you control for confounders and other risk factors. We've done a series of other studies that have brought in other administrative data. So for example, this is a study we published looking at 10 common health conditions. And we looked at inpatient costs and outpatient emergency department costs, prescription drug, but then we added in absenteeism, disability, and presenteeism. Again, on-the-job productivity loss when people have a condition that is not controlled. And it turns out that, for example, if you look at depression and substance abuse and other medical disorders that are mental health in nature, presenteeism is more important, way outweighs direct medical costs. So here in this analysis, we find that presenteeism costs actually are 2-fold more expensive than direct medical costs. And that's true for many of the other conditions out there. So the question then becomes is now that you know that these conditions are out there, they're prevalent, they're modifiable, is there a way of actually having an impact? Can you control them? And do workplace health and well-being programs, health promotion programs, wellness programs, whatever you call them, do they work? So when we ask this question, do these programs work, it's important to define terms. And often what I do is when I come into an organization, I gather all the decision makers around a table and I ask them, how would you know? What would you expect these programs to accomplish? What do you mean when you say a wellness program works? And you'll get a wide variety of responses. So people may say, well, I want to make workers aware of their health and how it improves their quality of life. High participation and engagement in these programs. I want them to lose weight, stop smoking, exercise more. Our medical claims should go down. We want less absenteeism, fewer safety incidents. We want to attract the best talent and retain those people. We want happy people with more energy. And we want to create a culture of health. That's a pretty long list of things to do. And then they say, well, one more thing we missed. We want to produce a positive ROI, meaning we want to pay you $1, but we want to get more than $1 back in return as a result of these intervention programs we put in place. That's a very, very tall order. By the way, rarely ever do you get an ROI from any other medical procedure. Usually, what we're talking about there is the effectiveness of that procedure, of that intervention, and how much it costs. So, back in September of 2014, there was an editorial written in the New York Times by a famous economist. And the question this editorial asked was, do workplace wellness programs work? And the answer was usually not. And the reason that the answer was usually not was it was based upon very, very few, less than a handful of randomized trials. We, surprisingly, interestingly enough, the same month and year, September 2014, wrote this article in the Journal of Occupational Environmental Medicine with the same headline, the same question: do workplace health promotion wellness programs work? 23 authors, including medical directors, economists, statisticians, consultants, people in corporate settings. Our answer was, it depends. It really depends upon whether the program has been properly designed, well implemented, and appropriately measured. So this ongoing debate on ROI, which is what most business owners are looking for. What's my return on investment for this kind of program, for this intervention? We're trying to move it away from ROI into this notion of VOI. So ROI, very simply, from an economic standpoint, is a cost-benefit ratio. That is savings in the numerator and program costs in the denominator. And the ratio is the ROI. So if I spend $2, if I save $2 and spend $1, my ROI would be 2 to 1. Did I save more money than I spent? Now, VOI is different because it includes outcomes that cannot be easily monetized. So let's say you're trying to attract and retain top talent. You want workers really committed to the mission and purpose of the company. You want people engaged. You want high morale. You want loyalty to the organization. You want to be recognized as an organization that really cares about its workers. It's very hard to monetize those kinds of outcomes. So essentially, here we're looking at something called cost effectiveness instead of a cost benefit ratio. What's the total value of my investment? Now, for those who are still interested in ROI, here's the staircase you've got to climb to get there. Number one, obviously, you've got to do a good job at marketing and building awareness of the program, making it accessible to people, making sure they know how to get the tools and resources that are out there and available. Number two, they have to actually take advantage of all of that. They've got to participate in the program. They need to become engaged and be so in a more committed way than just filling out a form. Thirdly, they need to actually gain from all those resources. They need to increase their knowledge, gain their skills in order to do some very hard things like quit smoking, eat healthy, exercise, manage stress, do all the things that we want these programs to accomplish. Next, they need to change their motivation for doing these things. So they see the list of skills and resources out there. They know they've got to do it. What's going to get them to do it? So it's their own motivation to change their behavior. What matters to me? Why do I want to do this thing? And usually it has to be aligned with something else that's important in their life, but also their attitude about their employer. Is the employer doing this just to save money? Is it to get more out of me? Or does the employer really care about my health and well-being? Next step is to do the hardest part, which is to change your behavior, get enough sleep, stop smoking, eat healthy, exercise, manage stress, cut back on alcohol consumption if you're drinking too much, get preventive screenings, take the medication you need. All those things are behaviors that need to be changed in order to improve your health and well-being, which in turn will reduce your risk for disease, which in turn will reduce utilization of company benefits. And if you do all these things right, and you have high engagement participation, and you measure them along the way, there's a possibility you'll actually be able to achieve a positive return on investment. But this is not going to happen in 3 months. Oftentimes, this staircase takes 3 to 5 years. Now, there was a lit review done in 2010, published in Health Affairs by 3 noted economists at Harvard. Their conclusion, after looking at 20 years of research, much of it done by my team, their conclusion was that there could be an ROI from these programs. In fact, you could probably get somewhere around a 3 to 1 ROI in terms of medical costs and about 3 to 1, close to a 3 to 1 return on absenteeism costs. But a more recent literature review done by other economists, including Eric Finkelstein, who's a friend of mine, came to a different conclusion. This was published in May of 2021. And they basically concluded there's really no ROI out there in the research literature. Now, their criteria for identifying credible studies were those that were randomized studies. In other words, you randomly assign people or work sites into the treatment or control conditions. Now, at that time, there were only 2 or 3 studies done that, and there are several limitations in those kinds of studies. For example, one of the most important things you need to do in order to create a healthy company culture is to have a committed leadership engagement, and to create a culture that has a strategic plan, has the resources of financing, the people, and all that. And it's very hard to randomize that. You can't say to one organization, you've got to do this for the next 3 to 5 years, replace your leader, your culture, resources, and all that. And over here, don't do that. No, we want to study you for 5 years. So it's almost impossible to do randomized trials, which is why we do studies that try to control for as many noise factors and confounders as possible. And here's some examples of some of the studies we've done through the years with some brand name organizations like Highmark, health insurance company in Pennsylvania, Johnson & Johnson, IBM, Citibank, Dow Chemical, Procter & Gamble, in which we have published findings that show that these programs can improve health and save money. The last systematic review of literature done by the Community Preventive Services Task Force, they're housed at the CDC. I was a member of that task force for many years. That systematic review concluded that these programs, these worksite health and well-being programs that not only have an assessment, but actually are followed up with intervention programs that are programs, policies, and environmental supports, actually were able to produce behavioral changes, biometric, and economic changes at the worksite, including healthcare cost savings and productivity improvements. But when somebody comes up to you and says, I want an ROI from this program, my rule would be say, okay, let's agree that a one-to-one ROI is good enough. In other words, you give me $1, I'll give you $1 back in return, but the program has to demonstrate health improvement. So just spending the money for a new gym or new facility or new equipment or whatever isn't good enough unless you can actually demonstrate that the program has had an impact on employee health and well-being. So what do you do? So I've mentioned this before. Oftentimes employers think all I've got to do is hire the right vendor, bring in somebody in here, and that vendor will change people, make them healthier. It turns out that the organization plays as an important role as individual change efforts. So what the employer needs to do is reinforce this culture of health and well-being. And that means better communication, transformative policies, visible leadership support for health, well-being, and safety. And this is taken from an initiative started at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So we've done a series of benchmarking studies where we've gone out and visited companies that have exemplary programs. Oftentimes, these are companies that have won awards for their programs. For example, for the last 29 years, we've been running the C. Everett Koop Award, National Health Award, for companies that have data documenting that their programs not only improve the health and well-being of their employees, but also produce a business outcome. And so we went out and we visited companies and published this paper with Karen Kent on my staff as lead author. These were the companies we visited, some very large companies like Johnson & Johnson and USAA and Citibank, but others kind of mid-sized companies like Lincoln Industries, LL Bean, Turk, and some even very small companies like NextJump, which is a company of 200 engineers, software engineers in New York. And here's what we discovered. Here's the secret sauce for occupational health and safety and well-being. I won't go through this. This is the top 10 list, secret ingredients. Number 1 and 2, which are fairly interchangeable, is to create this culture of health and have leadership commitment. And that can be demonstrated in a whole host of different ways. Importantly, embedded in here are having the employees engaged and involved in the decision-making, in the shaping and design of the program, having best practice interventions in place that are evidence-based, smart incentives. But at the bottom, what's really important is measurement and evaluation on an ongoing basis to make sure that what you're doing in the middle here is actually paying off and having an impact. So here's the model that we have adopted. This is actually developed back in the 1970s at the University of Michigan, which is a model for program evaluation, which looks at the structure of the program, things that are done at the individual level, done at the organizational level, the process of program delivery, which is raising awareness, increasing motivation, participation rates, and having people be happy with the program and how it's being delivered, and then critical outcomes that can fall into behavioral and health outcomes, economic outcomes, productivity outcomes, and other value-laden outcomes like company reputation. So the way we measure these things, we look at financial outcomes like ROI, and we can find savings in medical costs, absenteeism, disability. workers' comp, presenteeism, and the stock price. I'll get to the stock price studies in a minute, but you have to tie that into health outcomes, population health improvement, adherence to evidence-based medicine practices, behavior change, risk reduction, health improvement. And then finally, this other category, VOI, which is humanistic outcomes, improving the capacity, functioning, and productivity of the workforce, attraction, retention of top talent, engaging people in their work, demonstrating corporate social responsibility, and having a balanced scorecard that also includes diversity, equity, and inclusion. All right, Wall Street studies. So a number of studies have been done. There are probably about a dozen out there that have looked at companies that measure well, that have high scores in terms of culture of health and having the programs and policies, environmental supports to support health and well-being in the workplace, and looking at those companies' performance on the stock market, comparing them to the S&P 500, Standard & Poor's 500 index. Here's one study done with my colleagues at Hero. And here we looked at the period of 2009 to 2015, looking at those companies that have high scores on the Hero scorecard versus the S&P 500. And you can see that those companies with high scores outperform the S&P 500. But that's just one example. Let's take another study we published. This is in 2016, looking at the stock performance of winners of the C. Everett Koop Award compared to the S&P 500. And here we identified winners, and these were companies that won the award going way back to the 1990s through 2014. And it's actually a fairly small portfolio. It ended up being about 26 companies, not that different than the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which only includes 30 companies. And here's what we found. Had you invested $1,000, let's say back in 2001, in the S&P 500, you would have doubled your money. You would have made 105% gain in your value of your portfolio. But had you invested in the winners of the Koop Award, you would have tripled your money. Actually, the return would have been 325% on the portfolio. Those companies that won the Koop Award, demonstrating that they had programs that improved health and also had positive business outcomes. We've done other studies in that regard. This is a study published as a result of work we did with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And here again, different time horizon, different set of companies, but once again, demonstrating those companies which had high culture of health score compared to the S&P 500 outperformed that group, 115% increase in value versus 69% for the S&P 500 over this time horizon. Now, a lot of the work that we've done before, and we've done several benchmarking studies and literature reviews, led to the development of Center of Excellence at Johns Hopkins University. We call it the Poe Center, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, named after Edgar Allan Poe, who comes from Baltimore, Maryland. But what Poe stands for is psychosocial, organizational, and environmental. And what this means is that in order to address all those bad things we talked about earlier, you have to pay attention to individual factors, organizational factors, and environmental factors. And in fact, we started a brand new recognition program last year, which is focused on mental health in the workplace. So this is a Carolyn C. Mattingly Award for Mental Health in the Workplace, recognizes those organizations that do comply with evidence-based practices. Those are the ones that actually put those practices into place. And here are the award criteria. These are, again, kind of a secret sauce, magic ingredients for best practices in mental health and well-being. Here are some studies that we've published on the subject. We're now putting together a summit, which will happen in June of this year at Johns Hopkins, bring in experts to talk about how this can be applied at their various institutions. So let me end with this question, which is VOI. What's the VOI? Something that you as a business owner can ask. What's important to you? What do you really value as a business owner? And if what you come up with is similar to what I've got here on the screen, I want my business to thrive, to be innovative, to have workers who truly love their jobs and wake up excited each morning to go to work. Not only that, I want my employees' core mission and values to align with my own. That's my value. So if that's true for you, I think there's a lot that can be applied from the learnings that we've done in academia can be applied to real-day, practical, day-to-day decision-making. So with that, ask yourself, what's my role in all of this? End my presentation here, Julie, and give it back to you.
Thanks, Ron. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. As we go through this presentation, one of the things I was thinking about was small business owners. Most businesses in the US are small business, some mom and pop, less than 100 employees. What is your recommendation for how they address this?
So I think many of the policies that are out there are those that can be done at no cost, basically. This is how we run a business. This is who we are. This is what we're about. This is what we believe in. This is our mission. These are our core values. Those are things really that come free of charge. And for those people seeking guidance on how to do that, there are a number of tools that are available. For example, the CDC has something called the CDC Worksite Health Scorecard, 154 items, basically yes, no checklist, 18 different modules of things you can do, most often at no cost or little cost. Programs, policies, environmental supports that you can offer. Another example is a HERO scorecard, which is available on Hero-Health, a website. American Heart Association has something called a Workplace Health, WHAI, Achievement Index. There you go. That also is another checklist that you can take in order to put these in place. And the American Heart Association, interestingly enough, has added well-being, mental health and well-being to its list of risk factors that employers need to be paying attention to. So there are a number of these policies that employers can adopt that actually have very low or even no price tag attached to them, but demonstrate that the owners, at the leaders of the company, actually care about the health and well-being of their workers.
Do you think VOI is more important than ROI to small businesses?
Yeah, I think my answer always has been that if you're looking to save money, the easiest way to do that is to cut benefits. That's very, very straightforward. So increase deductibles, co-insurance, out-of-pocket maximums, basically trim your benefit plan design and make people pay more money for the benefits, and you will automatically, instantaneously, overnight save money. But that also will probably result in poor morale, people leaving the company, finding it harder to compete with other companies doing the same thing. If that's your only intent, really, that's the best way to save money. But in the long run, it may not work in terms of having a thriving business.
We all know how it feels when our insurance goes up in any area of our lives. So, Ron, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I really appreciated it. So thank you.
You're most welcome.
My name is Stephen Johnson, Executive Director of the College of Behavioral and Community Sciences at the University of South Florida. So at this point in this session, many of you might wonder what the financial impacts of mental health and addiction are on your business. It may be surprising to learn that you can get information very easily. The National Safety Council has two resources, one for calculating the impact of mental health challenges and another that helps see the impact of substance abuse on your company's bottom line. Joining me today is one of the original designers of the program, Dr. Eric Goplerud. Dr. Goplerud can give us a little history behind these calculators.
Thanks, Steve. Again, I'm really glad to be here and to speak to you about the two calculators. Maybe 15 years ago, I was leading a project funded by the Pew Charitable Trust that had as its goal to help employers, health plans, employee assistance programs, government to cover mental health and substance use problems at the same way as they cover other health conditions. At the time, it was very difficult to really make the case as to why business ought to pay more attention to mental health and substance use. What we felt was necessary, and this is when we were working at GW, at George Washington University, to develop a tool which could take the big numbers that you hear, mental health costs billions of dollars to the economy, and bring it down to something of what is it costing for untreated mental health or substance use problems in your workforce, in the workforce of an automobile manufacturer or a healthcare or a hospital. So what we tried to do was to use the best available epidemiological data about the prevalence of mental health and substance use problems among workers and among their family members, and used a big federal database, an annual survey called the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. Every year, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, interviews between 55 and 75,000 people to represent the US population to ask about mental health and substance use problems. With this database and with some of the questions that they ask about the industry that people work in, if they're employed, their occupation, their age, family status, and also questions that were embedded in this questionnaire about healthcare utilization, job turnover, absenteeism, that we were able to develop a tool which can be used by employers across the country to get a handle on not only how prevalent are these conditions, but since most employers don't feel like they're in the business of treating mental health or substance abuse, they're in the business of selling cars or in the business of selling real estate. We wanted to make it into developed, strongly supported data that is meaningful to you as an employer. What is it costing your bottom line, and how is it costing your bottom line? So what Steve is going to be putting up on the screen are two tools that we've developed: a mental health cost calculator for employers and a substance use cost calculator for employers, both of which are based on these very large epidemiological databases, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, and use the most recent data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics on costs, from large databases on the costs of healthcare utilization, on turnover, and the other things that we will be showing. So Steve, if you could show the first one. This is what will come up if you go to the National Safety Council's website and put in the mental health cost calculator. As you can see over on the right, the National Safety Council is an association of businesses that are focused on worker safety and promoting worker safety. They partnered with the National Opinion Research Center, or NORC, at the University of Chicago, where I most recently was working, to develop this calculator. Now, all that you need to do on this calculator, Steve has already done this, is to say what state is your facility or your business located in. In this case, we decided California. And how many employees do you have in your organization? We just put in 1,000. Now, what industry? There are about 11 groups of industries using the NAIC codes. And in this case, we picked public administration, but you could put in education, utilities, or construction, et cetera. If your business operates in a couple of states, you can see there is that blue button there where you could do the same, put the same information in about additional states. You have to put in what's your email so that you get the report. It comes directly to you, and then just click the button that says get your report. And it's as immediate as this. And what comes up is the results that are developed specifically for that number of employees in your state, in your industry. And this shows for the 1,000 employees in construction, the total cost of untreated mental health conditions in that workforce are likely to be about $1.3 million. If you go just a little bit down further, Steve, this breaks out where cost of lost time through unscheduled leave, turnover, and excess healthcare costs. These all are figured comparing people with an untreated mental health condition to workers in the same industry, in the same state, who do not have the mental health condition. So these are the excess costs. And you can expand this, and there's more detail that's back behind these. If you go just a little bit further down, this summarizes what the cost is of untreated mental health conditions in the workforce. So mentally distressed workers cost employers over $2,800 more in healthcare costs. And since many employers are self-insured, these are costs that come directly out of your bottom line. A distressed worker costs over $4,700 in excess days of work missed, over and above what their peers who do not have such problems would cost. And turnover rates are higher, so the replacement costs for workers with a mental health condition costs an employer for every person approximately $5,700. Now, we can break that out into greater detail. So go just drop this a little bit further, Steve. Now, we can estimate, based on these big surveys, that within this workforce of 1,000 employees in the construction industry, 65 of them are likely to have an untreated mental illness. And among family members, it's nearly twice as many. In fact, now we could go down and drill down a little bit further and move the screen down just a bit more. All of this is on a single screen. And we can break it out. The number who are likely to have a serious depression, an anxiety disorder, who have considered suicide in the last year, and who have a comorbid or also have a substance use condition as well as having a mental health condition. All of this is based on the epidemiological data. So one of the important things here is you see that in family members, there throughout, or family members who have the condition, this is going to weigh on the ability of the employee to attend to his work, to take an unscheduled leave to take their child to counseling. So the impact of family members, and as well if a company covers families as part of health insurance, this is going to also show up as a cost. Now, what we can also show in the next lower down in the screen is what is the savings that an employer gets for helping their employees get appropriate treatment for their mental health condition. So if you can drop that down just a little bit. And what we find, and there's more data that's behind every one of these screens, is that for every $1 invested in mental health treatment, there's a $4 return on investment in improved health, improved productivity, and reduced turnover. Now, what we'll now take a look at is going through the same set of data, but for a new state and a new industry. So let's take a look, and we're just sort of randomly picking Arizona rather than California, same number of employees, but the industry is construction, and we're looking at mental health. And again, all you have to do is put in your email and click the button that says get a report, and the screen comes up. And here in construction, the costs are a little bit less than what we saw in public administration, the costs to the employers. Now, this is primarily associated with the different characteristics of the workforce. Construction is generally a more male-dominated, public administration is a more female-dominated industry. And males and females express mental health and substance use conditions at different rates. So not surprisingly, the costs are different between these two conditions, between these two industries. Let's scroll down just a little bit, Steve. Still, the costs are pretty substantial. And let's go down to who's affected. And again, you'll see employees, it actually is somewhat a bit fewer employees have the mental health condition in construction and about the same number of dependents. Let's break it down a little bit more into the mental health conditions, dropping the slide down. And again, what you can see is looking specifically into these major categories of mental health distress. You can see the breakout of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and the co-occurrence of mental illness and substance use. And again, the savings, if you drop down again, are pretty substantial, about 1 in 4. $1 invested, you get a $4 return. Steve is going to show you now is we're going to go through the same information, but from a substance abuse perspective. So this is the substance use calculator using the same database, the same epidemiological database. And we'll take a look with California, 1,000 employees in public administration. So what comes up from that? All you again, get your report. In this case, you can see what the same kinds of breakout. These are places where the effect of untreated substance use is impacting bottom line. Lost time is unscheduled leave, whether that's PTO, unscheduled healthcare, or mental health days. Job turnover of increased cost of turnover, replacement, and training, and then healthcare costs. These are all comparing the healthcare time lost, job turnover of workers with a untreated substance use disorder from their peers in the same industry, in the same state. So let's drop down just a bit, Steve. What we found, which is, I think, one of the really important things coming from this study and from this work, is that when employees who have had a substance use disorder get treatment and are in recovery, which we defined as having a past substance use treatment in their lifetime, but no diagnosis, no diagnosable substance use disorder within the previous 12 months, that these workers are less likely to use healthcare services, take less unscheduled leave, and are less likely to turn over, not only from employees who have a substance use disorder, but in fact, they use less healthcare service, use less days of unscheduled leave, and are less likely to turn over than their peers who have never had a substance use disorder. So this really is, I think, most striking, that we can show that helping your employees get screened and treated for a substance use disorder directly affects your bottom line. You get better workers. So let's drop down just a little bit and you can see more about who is impacted. First of all, this is public administration, 1,000 employees in California. And you can see the numbers of those who are affected, both the employees and their family members. But let's drop down just a little bit more onto the specific substances. This is a really, really important slide. If you take a look at this, and it shows across every one of the industry sectors, alcohol is far and away the condition of, or the substance of abuse that is affecting employers' bottom lines. Surprisingly, for many people, opioids, heroin, fentanyl is very small in every industry that we've looked at. The difference and why it is so pressing and makes headlines is that it is so dangerous with the addition of fentanyl into the drugs. So the prevalence is small, but the impact is great just because of how lethal the addition of fentanyl is into opioids. We also break out here cannabis and other drugs, cocaine, methamphetamines, use of other prescription drugs. If you drop down just a little bit more, you'll see this is where you can see what the avoided costs are for changing the rates of identification and treatment of substance use in your workforce. Now, this is a slider where we've set it at the rate where depression is typically treated. About 50% of the people who in the workforce who have depression receive treatment, and the vast majority of them improve. If, and Steve, you could move the slider up to say 70%. 70% is about where we are in the treatment of diabetes. And you can see that if we can increase the rates of identification and treatment for substance use in this workforce, that there is a substantial savings, almost more than $500,000, if we reach just the level of how we treat diabetes. If we move it up even higher to, say, the rates of what we treat hypertension, we get corresponding increases in savings. Now, let's go back to the case that we had of Arizona, and let's take a look at how that differs. Arizona, again, 1,000 employees, Arizona in construction. And take a look here. If you recall, the costs for public administration was about half of the cost that we're seeing here. And this is almost entirely because of the different characteristics of the workforce. Men are much more likely to meet criteria for a substance use disorder than are women. Women are more likely to meet criteria for depression or anxiety disorder. That shows up in corresponding differences in the cost and the impact. So it's almost twice as much here as in public administration. Let's drop down just a bit and we can see how those. Let's go down to who's affected. If you recall, there was something like someplace in the 60s of employees who had in public administration, who had a substance use disorder. Here, it's substantially higher. Among dependents and family members, because the family members and dependents of construction workers are more likely to be women and children, the prevalence of substance use disorder is lower. Now let's drop down again, looking at what specific substances. And here you can see, as the point I made a bit ago, alcohol is overwhelmingly the substance of abuse and dependence. However, because we have more of a prevalence of substance use among this primarily male workforce, we have a higher rate of opioids, also of cannabis and of other drugs. The impact, and if you drop down the take action portion, is higher because you have a greater prevalence and a greater cost in that workforce. Now, we've gone through these 4 examples, and I certainly encourage you to enter the data. It's all anonymous for your workforce. But we can take this off the screen. And I want to emphasize there are many small employers who have 50 employees or 35 employees. Because this data, these calculators, are based on national samples, it probably is not a good idea to enter a small workforce into the calculator. It's just that the predictive ability of these tools gets really pretty bad when we get down to smaller numbers. I would counsel against anything smaller than a workforce of 100 using this calculator. The larger the number of employees in the workforce, the greater is the likelihood that the data are reasonably good for making estimates in your workforce.
So Dr. Goplerud, thank you for sharing that information and providing what these cost calculators can provide. Could you provide some information on what they don't tell us?
What these tools do not do is to tell you what specifically works. However, there are buttons there on the Tell Me More part of the report, which go into what are the evidence-based practices for screening and treatment. So these tools don't tell you what to do, but they can link you to data about what are the effective prevention, early intervention, and treatment technologies. Also, one of the things that this tool is not going to do is to say, John Jones or Wilma Smith are the people who are depressed or who have an anxiety disorder, or who have a substance use disorder. This is giving you a handle on the potential scope of these conditions in your workforce. Also important to stress is that in each one of these cases, we're showing you the prevalence of the conditions or how common the conditions are among family members. And it's really important to realize that the mental health or substance use of family members has a direct impact on employees' ability to attend to work, to show up, to be productive while at work. And so directing or working with your health insurance, working with your employee assistance program to help identify more people and their family members who have these substance use and mental health conditions will not only help them, help you as an employer to have a healthy and productive workforce.
Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And in conclusion, there will be a link to these cost calculators provided in the list of resources. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Patrick Kennedy. I'm a former member of Congress and author of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. I'm so honored to be here with the University of South Florida and the Crisis Center of Tampa Bay to discuss the issues of mental health and addiction and the need for us to take a fresh new approach to how we attack them and really address this public health crisis in our country. When I sponsored and passed the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, it was an opportunity to finally put a spotlight on the fact that mental health and addiction were not reimbursed in the same way as all physical and medical and surgical care. The real goal of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act was to end the discrimination towards those people who had a brain illness versus another illness of the body. We made very clear under federal law that you couldn't charge any higher copays, higher premiums, higher deductibles, nor could you have lower lifetime caps for coverage, any different than you would have for any other physical illness. We also identified all the areas of insurance reimbursement, from inpatient in-network to outpatient in-network, inpatient out-network, outpatient out-of-network, and pharmacy benefits and emergency room benefits. Our real goal here was to end the separate and unequal treatment of brain illnesses versus any other illnesses of the body. This has been a challenge to actually see this fully implemented. We're going to celebrate the 15th anniversary of this bill being signed into law, and yet it is still not fully enforced. We have a legacy of discrimination that is hard to overcome overnight. One of the reasons we have such a crisis in access to care is that we've never reimbursed for this care, and therefore there's never been the pipeline of a workforce going into providing this care because reimbursements have been so anemic. And so today we do not have essentially the infrastructure to meet the needs of our populace in terms of their mental health and addiction needs. So in a very real sense, employers have a real opportunity to push their third-party administrators, their insurers, to make sure that they have sufficient in-network access. In-network access is critical if you want people to take up the treatment and improve their lives and improve their productivity. We now know that the issue of mental health and addiction is not just an issue of those with severe and persistent mental illness, people who we see on our city streets and people who are locked up in jails and prisons simply because there is no public health system to address their illness. This is also an issue for business. We know post-COVID that there are great concerns about worker productivity now that we're living in a virtual hybrid world. How do we make sure we give the support for employees that they need to be productive? And this isn't soft science. The data is very clear. When people receive mental health care, not only do they see their total cost of care costs go down, many chronic illnesses are driven by undiagnosed and untreated mental health conditions. But we also see the cost in disability, the cost in workers' comp, the missed days of work, and the issue called presenteeism, which means people are there, but they're not really there and focused. These are real economic issues. And you add to that the annual churn in employment, so that we're seeing 30 to 40% of employers see their workforce churn every given year. So it's important for businesses to not only provide services, but it's also important for them to create a culture where people coming to work feel connected and feel that their mental health is recognized as important to that company. We're in a situation now where the new generation has grown up with technology, as we know from the recent Surgeon General's report on the impact of technology on our young people's ability to manage their emotions and their feelings. And so what we really need to do is really go early in our preparation for allowing young people to learn the skills of problem solving, coping, and those life skills that now are almost like the STEM education was 30 years ago, when businesses led for science, technology, engineering, and math were existential issues for our companies across America when compared to countries across the world. We now need to make social emotional learning, these coping mechanisms, such an integral part of the skill set for workers. And that's not going to come on its own. It's going to take real leadership from businesses to put a premium on that, not only within their own business, but societally with better public policies that reach our young people earlier before they become our next generation of employees. So these are all very important issues. We live in a toxic political culture with existential crises like the environment, the trauma of COVID, the trauma of gun violence, the trauma that often creates the stressors to exacerbate these mental health conditions. These are all real, and they're having a real impact on workers and all Americans in this country. We can better manage our country's challenges if we understand how to approach them without having to react to them. And so this is really a national security issue for our country. We're not going to be able to address healthcare, justice reform, political dialogue, and really saving our democracy, or tackling any major issues like the environment without having a better skill set to manage our own emotions and mental health. This, in addition to managing the crisis of overdose and suicide and homelessness that still is unfortunately on the rise. So I just want to thank again the University of South Florida, the Tampa Bay Crisis Center, for all of their good work in creating this course. And I hope that it's helpful to all of you who are attending this, and look forward to seeing it all become a great tool to help change the course of our approach towards mental health and addiction going forward in this country. Thank you so much.
At the end of each session, we will offer you questions to reflect upon for the next session. How comfortable are you talking openly about mental health issues?
How do you feel about your own mental health and how it impacts your work?
How does your leadership or organizational culture feel about mental health and those who are struggling?
What is one thing that would help your organization in building a healthy culture that supports its employees?
Given your role in the organization, how can you help change and or build a healthy culture? These are things we want you to think about until the next session. Until then, be well.